Alright, ladies and gentlemen, today for our Module 4 notes, we're going to do something a little unusual. We're going to do something, well, a little out of the ordinary, but we're going to make it look ordinary really fast. Let me explain what we're doing. Today we are going to rewrite decimal division. We are going to rewrite decimal division as fraction division. Now, earlier in the school year, we've talked about how really in 5th grade you shouldn't be putting too many decimals into fractions. It looks a little weird. I'm going to do that for a tiny bit today. But again, please don't panic. It's going to be over very quickly. This is lesson 30 in Module 4. So we need 10, 20, and 30. Now, thankfully, none of the modules go up to 40 or to 50. Things would look a little bit different at that point. But for us, for 4-30, x, and then another x. All right, here's our process. I'm going to give you 2 decimals that we're dividing. And this is what we're going to do first. Step 1. For step 1, rewrite the division expression as a fraction. Now, we've talked about how fractions are just another way to show division. So we're not changing anything by doing this. We're just making it look a little different. So let's see. If I give you 6 3/10 divided by 9/10. 6 3/10 divided by 9/10. Now, it helps if we review a tiny bit of vocabulary here. Remember that this first part is called the dividend. This is what we're breaking up. This is what we're going to divide into smaller pieces. And the number of smaller pieces, or the size of those smaller pieces, we call that the divisor. Okay? Now, we are going to take these and we are going to turn them into a fraction, which, if you remember, I've told you before, the top is always the first number, the bottom is always the second number. So this on top, this on the bottom. More accurately, more mathematically, dividend goes on top, divisor goes on the bottom. So this is the weird part where I said we wouldn't really be seeing too much of this, and now I'm having you write it. Sorry. 6 3/10 over 9/10. Now, decimals there. Don't worry about it though. We're going to get rid of them pretty fast. Let's take a look at step 2. Step 2. We are going to multiply the fraction by a form of 1. Now, this is a very fancy way of telling you to do something that we've been doing the entire school year, as long as we've been working on fractions. Anytime you multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same thing, multiply them both by 2, multiply them both by 10, doesn't matter. Anytime you do that, you're multiplying by some form of 1. Now, I've tried to mention that before, but I don't always bring it up, so if this is not sounding familiar, trust me that you've done this. Multiply the fraction by a form of 1. And just like I mentioned a moment ago, I'm going to put a little reminder under here. Remember any fraction. Make that really dark. I want to make sure it's really clear. Any fraction with the same numerator, any fraction with the same numerator and denominator, equals 1. Now, when we're dealing with decimals, we know that decimals are built around powers of 10. We're basically saying it's a tenth or a hundredth or a thousandth. It's all based on powers of 10. So everything you're going to multiply is going to be 10, basically. Let me show you. Slide this up a little bit. If I take that fraction, 6 3/10 over 9/10, I don't want to deal with that. We can do that division. Actually, I'll teach you in the next lesson, but I don't want to deal with that right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply it times 1. Now, if I just multiply by 1, that in itself is not going to be terribly helpful. What I need to do is multiply by some form of 1. I want to multiply by a fraction that would equal 1. And the reason I'm multiplying by 1 is because anything times 1 is just itself. It doesn't change. So, 10 over 10 is the fraction that I'm going to pick this time. 10/10. Now the reason I do this is because I know that if I multiply by 10, the decimal moves over one spot, so does this one. So my problem becomes 63 over 9. Now 63 over 9, I've gotten rid of the decimal. The decimal goes over 1 because it's 10, over 1 because it's 10. 63 over 9 is easy. 63 divided by 9, I can do that no problem. So for step 3, let's divide, simplify, and record. 63 divided by 9. Well, 63 divided by 9. Hopefully you know your multiplication facts. You've got that one down. Your answer's 7. And that's it. That's the answer for the original problem. 6 3/10 divided by 9/10 is 7. If you can look at these numbers, and I know a lot of you like to do this, you like to kind of mentally take out the decimal point. If you can mentally take the decimal point out and it looks like a fact family you already know, then this is probably going to be an easy way to do the division. Now, sometimes they don't look like a fact family. Like I said, we'll talk about that in the next lesson. I guess I better wrap up. There's the bell. Let's do a couple quick examples, maybe 3 examples, and then we'll be finished. Okay. Let's start with 4 8/10 divided by 1 2/10. Now, if you recognize 48 divided by 12, then you're already mostly done. But let's go ahead and write it out properly. Here's our decimal on top. Here's our decimal on bottom. And it makes me super uncomfortable doing that. I don't want to leave those like that. So I'm going to multiply times some form of 1. The mighty 1. Now, each of these has one decimal place. One decimal place. So a 1 with a single 0 after it ought to do the trick. Multiply times 10 times 10, that moves the decimal over. 48 over 12, like I mentioned a moment ago. If I do that division, 12 will go into 48 4 times. Now, I know that off the top of my head. I think some of you do as well. But if you're not as strong on your 12s, that's okay. Do the long division, use the standard algorithm, you'll get that answer. Next one. And if I'm going too fast, don't be afraid to pause the video. Try it yourself. That's good advice anyway. Now for this, we have 54 hundredths, 6 hundredths. So we're dealing with slightly longer decimals this time. We still write them over and under. We still write them as a fraction. And we're still going to multiply times some form of the mighty 1. We just need to figure out what form that's going to take. Now, looking at the 54 hundredths, looking at the 6 hundredths, we hear hundredths a lot. We have 2 decimal places. So this time, instead of 10, I'm going to multiply by 100. And the reason I want to do 100 is, again, I hear hundredths, hundredths. I also want to move that decimal point over 2 spots. So I'm going to need 2 zeros. That gives me 54 over 6. And if I divide that, kind of go off the screen a little bit, if I divide that, 54 divided by 6 is 9. All right, we're almost at 12 minutes. Last one. Let's do 72 hundredths divided by 9 tenths. Now this is different. This is different. This time, 72 hundredths, we have 2 decimal places. 9 tenths, we have 1. Up until now, it's been the same number of decimal places, but this, we've got 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom. So what do? Well, it's a little trickier. We're going to have to look at the one that has, I'm sorry, I just noticed, it's not equal to 1. It should be multiplied times 1. We're going to look at these. We're going to see the one that has the most decimal places. And we are going to multiply by a 1 with that many zeros after it. So 1 and 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, when I multiply the 100 times 72 hundredths, that's pretty easy. That gives me 72. But 0.9, I'm going to be moving this over 1 space, 2 spaces. So the 9 tenths is going to become 90. Now 72 divided by 90 is not going to work evenly. But if I reduce it down, if I divide the top and the bottom by the same number, I'll get 4 over 5. Okay. And in this case, you would be dividing the top and the bottom by 18, which is a little ridiculous. So don't worry, we would probably realistically do that just a few prime numbers at a time. Divide by 2, divide by 3. All right, that's it for these notes. If you have any questions, bring them to class. We'll talk about them then. We'll do more practice as well so that you can see more of these forms of 1 and how we're making these weird-looking decimal fractions into regular fractions that you know how to work with. All right, thank you, folks. I will see you next time.